morning and welcome to Q&A, live from Docklands in Melbourne. Very live, in fact. I'm Tony Jones. Joining us tonight, the Shadow Minister for Health, Catherine King, the editor of Spiked Online, I think that is, Brendan O'Neill, comedian, writer, actor and law graduate Corinne Grant, the Minister for Communications and Arts, Mitch, Fifield, and academic and entrepreneur Erin Watson-Lynn. Please welcome our panel. Thank you. Now, Q&A is live in the eastern states on ABC TV and in the centre and the west on News 24. You can also watch and listen live across Australia on iView and News Radio and around the world on Facebook. Well, the issue of racial abuse is in the headlines again after yet another incident in the AFL after a fan threw a banana at Indigenous player Eddie Betts. The woman has since been publicly shamed and, according to her father, demonised. Well, we'll start tonight with questions about freedom of expression and racism. Our first question is from Annabeth Simpson.
Brendan O'Neill, you wrote that you want Section 18C torn up because you, and I quote, trust Australians to use their unshackled reason to separate the good ideas from the wicked ones. Growing up as a person of colour in Australia, I know that racial abuse is not an uncommon experience. In fact, despite being a respected pharmacist in his community for 16 years, my father is racially vilified on a regular basis. Do you think the removal or changes to 18C that may give people more social licence to racially discriminate is appropriate?
Brendan, start with you.
I think Section 18C is a disgrace. I think it's a black mark against the good name of Australia, simply for the very basic reason that it invites the state to police thought and speech. And it is, in my view, it is never the role of the state to police thought and speech. And if you just look at, for example, recent cases like the Andrew Bolt case or the QUT case, where students are currently being threatened with punishment for expressing disagreement with the idea of having segregated laboratories for Indigenous students, what you have is a situation in Australia in the 21st century where people are being punished for expressing an opinion. And to my mind, that brings to my mind the Soviet Union, the Orwellian idea of a society in which you can be punished for thinking certain things and for saying certain things. I simply think it's unacceptable, it's never acceptable to invite the government to police the realm of thought and speech. Of course, the government must police the realm of action and behaviour, and if you push someone or punch someone or murder someone, you will be punished. But if you express an opinion, you should never, ever be punished for that.
Let me just put this to you. You've written that you actually like it when you hear hateful speech because it reminds you you're in a free society. That's going a bit far, isn't it?
No, I love hearing hate speech for two reasons. Firstly, because it reminds me I live in a free society. And secondly, because it allows me, as someone who has been an anti-racist campaigner since I was 18 years old, to challenge those ideas. This is the real problem with Section 18C. It actually disempowers anti-racists by denying us, robbing us of the right to see racism, to know it, to understand it, and to confront it in public. Instead, it entrusts the authorities to hide that racism away on our behalf, which means that we never have a reckoning with it. I'm opposed to anti-racist censorship precisely because I am anti-racist, and I want the opportunity to know where these people are, know what they think, and challenge them in the public realm.
I'm just going to go back to our questioner, Annabeth. You look a little sceptical. What do you make of that argument, that he's anti-racist but free speech is too important to fool with? Well,
firstly, I think that, since the new part of 18C, which talks about, offending people and intimidating people, came in around, I think it was 1995, and to, encourage social cohesion in this multicultural society that we live in and, free people from mental harm from being racially vilified. And according to the Human Rights Commission, the way these cases are solved are actually come about in a more educational way. So if someone, for instance, I think there was an example where they said at a caravan park, no Aboriginals will be, taken in here at all. And the way that was solved is usually on a mutual agreement and people talk it out and there's, a small fine to be paid, but there's an interaction and a conversation about it anyway, and it allows people to, use that legal means to get compensation for that sort of thing. So that's my opinion.
Just a brief response, because I want to hear from the other panellists, but you can just respond to that quickly.
Well, I think obviously discrimination is a different matter. If you are actively discriminating against someone and preventing them from accessing public services, that's a different question. But I think it's very important that when it comes to expressing opinion, even if it's ugly opinion, we have to protect people's right to do that, because otherwise you'll end up in a situation where the state has the right to decide what's a good opinion and what's a bad opinion. And no one, least of all minority groups, should support that. We must remember that every marginalised group in history has seen free speech as their greatest friend, because it's the means through which they can express themselves, through which they can argue against their oppression, through which they can challenge the authorities. So we have to defend the right to free speech for everyone, particularly for marginalised groups.
I'd like to defend your right to free speech. We will talk about this for quite a while. I'll just go right to the other side of the panel first. Erin, Watson-Lynn, what do you think?
I would agree with you, Brendan, that in the society we live in, we should be able to express our opinions, and whether that's good or bad. And so in that sense, I would agree with you. I don't agree that I enjoy hearing hate speech, however. I think that it's not a pleasant experience to hear something like that. But I would agree that, if you're able to give a good opinion, you should also be able to give a bad opinion. And I remember, Corinne, you said something recently about us being able to think about this as humans and say, well, what's a good thing to say and what isn't a good thing to say. And as people, we should learn how to do that better rather than sit there and be governed by the state about what we should and should not say.
Are you happy with 18C as it stands, Erin?
Look, what I would say is that as in the society we live in, we should have the freedom to be able to say things, whether it's good or bad.
OK, let me just, we'll go. I mentioned at the beginning the woman who threw the banana at the AFL player. Was that crossing a boundary? Because the AFL has decided it was a racist act.
Well, I think the boundary that she's crossed is throwing a banana onto a sports field at an event versus expressing her opinion. So I think perhaps that's the line that she's crossed. I think that the way that she's been vilified afterwards is not necessarily the right thing either, though. But people should be able to express their opinion on that.
Right, let's hear from the other non-politician. Corinne, what do you think?
Firstly, the line between speech and action is not that clear cut. Speech is a type of action. And if you're inciting hatred of other people, there's all kinds of studies that show that when anti-Muslim sentiment goes up, Muslim women especially are more likely to be verbally insulted, more likely to be spat on in the street, and more likely to be physically assaulted. So this idea that we are policing the thoughts of people or policing free speech and policing genuine opinions held by people is rubbish. And Section 18D of the same Racial Discrimination Act protects fair comment if it comes from a reasonable place in good faith. And that is what Andrew Bolt fell foul of, because it wasn't fair comment. His comments were incorrect. So you've got to differentiate between 18C and 18D. If you just take one out of the equation and carry on with a whole lot of hyperbole, you're missing the point.
OK, we're in the capital of AFL, I would argue anyway. What about the case of the woman who threw the banana at Eddie Betts over the weekend?
That's a well-known racist act. That's been happening in the UK for years. Bananas are thrown at black players all the time. There's also reports in the media, whether they're true or not, witnesses saying on the day that she said that he was a monkey. So I think we do have to look at it. I don't agree with vilifying her. I don't think that solves anything, and I think that's immature. But I am very pleased that Port Adelaide jumped on it straight away, and they invited her to take part in their Indigenous awareness program, and she's going to do that.
And she has actually said she made a terrible mistake.
And I congratulate her for that, and I congratulate her for taking part in the Indigenous awareness program, and I hope that she learns a lot from it, and she learns to have an appreciation for the enormous contribution that Indigenous people have made to our society.
Mitch Fifield, to go back to the original question, and it really is around whether 18C is necessary to protect people, well, look, especially those who are vulnerable.
Yeah, I don't think any law can change the way that people think, and no law can stop people from being dopes.
Some laws change the way people act, otherwise we wouldn't have laws for murder, for example.
Sure. I mean, the law can give people a degree of comfort, but I think the greatest defence that we have against racism is ensuring that we have a society that is tolerant. that we debate, that we debunk, that we argue fiercely against those ideas that are reprehensible. I think the culture that we have in our nation is our greatest defence. But I've got to say, as a member of the government, while I appreciate many of the worthy arguments that some of my colleagues put forward in relation to 18C, it's not something that we have an intention to change. We have many higher legislative priorities, and I say that particularly as the manager of government business in the Senate. There's a lot of stuff we've got to do.
Catherine King, I just want to hear you on this briefly, because we've got a few questions on the same topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason this is being activated again is because the Liberal backbench is engaged in the right wing of the Liberal backbench is engaging in this in the public domain. So the reason this is out again is that Turnbull's not standing up to them. I don't think any of us can understand at all the hurt that people experience on a daily basis because of racism, unless we are in that position ourselves. 18C has served this country well since 1995. It's an important part of our multicultural and the social compact we all have with each other as a fair and equal society, and Labor supports it. We do not support its removal, and I think it should be incumbent on Malcolm Turnbull to make that very, very clear to his backbench.
All right, let's have another look at this law in action. The next question comes from Bradley Harvey.
This week, our Prime Minister and Treasurer have essentially said that they're too busy to address concerns about the 18C law and the financial costs and reputational damage being incurred by 3 university students in Queensland. If free speech has become such a low priority for the Liberal Party, is it time for libertarian and conservative-minded voters to find a new party to represent their views?
Now, Mitch Fifield, I'll go back to you because you more or less repeated the formulation. You're too busy to deal with this issue.
Well, look, it's not a matter of being too busy. As a government, you have to prioritise. And what we're doing is we're prioritising the introduction of legislation, which you may well support, I don't know, to bring back the Australian Building and Construction Commission. We want to introduce registered organisations bill, which will see the same requirements of union office holders that we expect of company directors. We want to introduce legislation that will protect the volunteers of the CFA. We have our budget repair legislation, which I hope Catherine will agree to support, $6.5 billion worth of savings that Labor said they were committed to in the election. Governing is about priorities. Mr Abbott in 2014 said that reform of 18C was something that was off the table. That remains our position. We've got a full agenda ahead and we're going to pursue it.
What do you make of the university case in Queensland and the student Alec Wood, who reportedly is being sued for $250,000 over an 18C racial hatred case?
Well, I don't know the specific of that case, but Catherine mentioned some of my backbench colleagues who are raising the issue of 18C. In the Coalition, we don't operate a Stalinist operation. Our backbench colleagues are entitled to have their view, they're entitled to put those forward, they're entitled to have those heard. It's appropriate that we debate in a democracy, and one of the things that informs debate is the real-life experience and the worked examples of legislation. So 18C, we will see how that plays out in terms of those cases that are brought against people. We will see how that works out, and obviously those things will feed into the debate about that legislation.
Right, I'll bring in Brendan O'Neill, who's got a stronger opinion on this than you have, clearly. The Queensland case,
put in both camps,
Queensland case is a strange one because the university authorities apparently 3 years ago cleared the student Alec Wood of wrongdoing. What do you make of that particular case so that we can talk about that in some detail?
Australia should be ashamed of this case. The fact that students are being sued for saying things such as stopping segregation with segregation after they were thrown out of a segregated laboratory which was devoted to Indigenous use. They expressed an opinion. Now, you can all agree or disagree as you choose with that opinion, but they simply said something. They simply expressed what they felt. And now they're being sued for up to $250,000. That is outrageous. Whatever side of the spectrum you fall on, you must recognise that it is outrageous to punish people for saying something that they believe to be true or that they feel to be true. The thing that I find really actually quite repulsive about this debate is the suggestion that we've already heard from Corinne, and a suggestion perhaps also from Catherine, that free speech is all well and good for us white people, but we can't possibly understand how it impacts on minority groups. This is really an ugly idea, actually. Because I can tell you from my reading of history, there is no repressed or minority group in history that has not benefited from freedom of speech. Frederick Douglass, the great escaped slave in America, he argued passionately for freedom of speech, and he argued passionately that freedom of speech was the means through which repressed peoples could express themselves and liberate themselves. I'm really worried.
I'm going to interrupt you just to clarify something. That is, this case in Queensland was brought against these university students by an Indigenous woman,
yes,
who has a history and a background going right back to school days of being racially abused. Now, I mean, just to put that in context, what do you say to that?
I say that the way you deal with racial abuse is by campaigning against it, arguing against it, exposing it. You do not call on the authorities.
Taking these kids to
no,
court
it's not.
is.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
I don't think you understand how the legal system
Hold on,
works.
I'll tell you how this works. What you are doing, you are calling on the authorities to punish these people for what they said.
No, I'm asking them to
rather
look
than,
at the
no,
facts
hold on,
of the
I haven't
case.
finished. Rather than
Then finish quickly so the others can talk.
Rather than publicly arguing and campaigning against it, there's an element of cowardice in this. You call on the authorities to combat racism because you feel you cannot do it yourself. Racism must be tackled in the public realm through democratic, open debate. That's the only way to defeat it.
Okay, I'll go
And by
back.
the way,
So I'm going to go back to Annabeth, who asked her very first question. Listening to this debate unfold, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I just don't think it can be compared free. In democracy like Australia, you have to protect the individual right to some free speech, but at the expense of, social harmony, like cohesion in the society like that. I just think, more times, if you have a principle like anti-racial discrimination and you put it into a legislation, like that's powerful for people, for minority groups. It's symbolic. It has like a symbolic and moral weight to it. And I think to say that it's cowardly for these people, like it's so hard to get these even cases through. You think it's cowardly to stand up to someone who's racially abusing you? I think that I don't agree with that at all.
I can't believe is it a good or a bad thing that students have been sued $250,000 for saying something?
Okay,
seriously
you've
having
made
this
that point. I want to
discussion?
hear from the other panellists on that. And Corinne, you're actually now a lawyer, about to be a lawyer. What do you say about that particular case?
I'm in my trainee year. I want to get admitted, so let's not call me a lawyer before I am.
About to be a lawyer.
Yeah, about to be. The legal system exists for a reason, and part of that reason is for these debates to be able to be had in an open court with an impartial judicial officer weighing up the pros and cons of it. That's what our legal system is for. That is part of the democratic process. If you're going to argue that people shouldn't be able to sue other people for under 18C, then we've got to get rid of defamation laws as well. We've got to get rid of copyright. We've got to get rid of negligence. We've got to get rid of basically the entire legal system.
So can I just get, were you
world.
surprised to hear that a fine potentially of $250,000 could be levelled against an offender in this case?
I don't think we know enough about the case, and I certainly don't know enough about
That's how it's being reported, as we know.
Yeah, well, that's how it's being reported, but I haven't seen a statement of claim. I don't know what the evidence is, and I don't know what the merits of the case are, and I'm not willing to comment on it. And I don't think any of us should be.
That's all you need
don't
to know.
know the
They
rest of the
said
case, Brendan.
something.
You've read something in the newspaper. That's
They
not
wrote
the same
something
thing
on
as
Facebook.
knowing
They
what
did
the
not hit
evidentiary
anyone.
basis
They
for
did not damage property. They said something. Do you think someone should be fined $250,000 for saying something? Yes or no? Right. It's a really simple question.
Let's go to the end of the panel and hear what Erin thinks.
Well, I think this is all very interesting, but we didn't actually answer the question, which was whether or not Conservatives should find a new party to represent their views. And
what's the answer, Erin? What do you think?
Yeah.
If you don't agree with what's going on in the party, then yes, find another party to represent your views. Start your own party. I don't think that there's any point in having that sort of squabble. If you don't agree with the party that you've chosen to represent you, then perhaps look elsewhere and look yourself to start a party. So I think if you are disenfranchised, then sure, look elsewhere. And I think that, for young people, there is certainly a disconnect between in the right, where we're seeing a lot more socially progressive people who are still economic conservatives. And so the parties, they might not agree with what direction they're going in. So, look, I would agree, perhaps you do need to look elsewhere.
I'm just going to go to Catherine King. Is it possible there are cases that are brought inappropriately, and are fines of that nature If that's the case, $250,000 against 3 university students, is that too much?
Again, that is, what we have our legal system for. It will be up to the legal system to determine that. I do understand this case has gone on for some time, and of course, that can be a matter of issues around resourcing and all of those things as to getting these cases through. And I think for these students, having a resolution quickly is important for them. But again, that is what we have our legal system for, is to actually make those determinations and to bring that out. The debate that happens, or the information that happens through court, is actually part of the process as well.
I'm just going to quickly go back to the Minister. $250,000, the Queensland case are you happy with that? Because a lot of your colleagues are not.
Well, in a sense, all legislation is always under review in the light of the practical outworking of it and in the light of decisions that courts make. If over time courts make decisions in an area and the Parliament thinks they haven't got it right, then it's open to the Parliament to change the legislation. But I don't know the specifics of this particular case. But just responding to our friend who asked the question before, in terms of is it time to look at a different political party? Can I say, if you're of the centre-right and you haven't joined the Liberal Party, do, because the best thing you can do to express your view is to join the party and take part in the forums of it. So I've got a membership form if you want one after.
OK, now remember, if you hear any doubtful claims, send a tweet using the hashtags FactCheck and Quanta. That wasn't really a segue. And keep in mind on our Twitter account, keep an eye on our Twitter account for verdicts. Now, the next question is a video. It's from Caitlin Dunn in Meadowbank, New South Wales.
Recently, news broke of an online pornography ring targeting young women and girls from 74 Australian high schools. The ring trades sexually explicit images, all shared without consent, and some depicting unwitting victims as young as 14. Users of the website encouraged each other to go get 'em boys and also share the personal and private details of how to find these girls. Despite this, a statement from Queensland Police placed responsibility squarely at the feet of the underage victims and their parents, and claimed that initial investigations found that there were no clear acts of child exploitation. My question is to the panel. In an era of revenge porn and online sharing, do you believe it's time that increased protections be put in place to better protect women and girls from this kind of online predatory behaviour? OK,
let's start with Erin on this one.
I think when we're talking about women and girls who are under the age of 18 in particular, absolutely we need to be protecting them because this sort of discrimination and revenge porn, it has lifelong impact for women and girls. So when that starts at such a young age, I think we have a role as a society to protect those young women, absolutely.
So one of the women victims says she went to the New South Wales Police. She's now not underage, but when these photos of her or images of her naked were shown on the internet, or were put on the internet, when they were taken, in fact, she was 16 years old. Now, it was said to her, she says, by the police, it was your own fault. You should not have had those photos taken. What do you say to that?
Oh, we have this huge victim-blaming culture in our society. I don't know what this is about, but for some reason, when anything happens to women, we drag them into a room and we say, you should stop wearing short skirts and you should stop dressing provocatively. But the reality is that I heard this great quote recently that in order to save the girls, we need all the boys. And I thought that was brilliant because we can't move forward on this until men start to take some kind of responsibility. This victim-blaming culture we have is vile.
I want to hear from all the women first, and I'll come to that. So, Corinne.
I think it's really troubling that this exists in the first place in 2016. I want to know what is happening to our young men that they think this is an appropriate way to treat women, because it's incredibly dehumanising. It reduces women to nothing but body parts. And it has a lifelong effect on them. There was a Senate inquiry recently into so-called revenge porn laws, and I don't think that's quite the apt word for it, because it's broader than that. And there were submissions made for a call for a law to be brought in that would make it, there would be criminal sanctions attached to anybody who deliberately and maliciously disseminated naked images of people without their consent for the purpose of humiliation or denigration. And I think it's time for that law to come in. There are laws out there that are supposed to protect women from these kinds of images, but the police aren't using them. There's a whole lot of stats that say the police aren't using them. So I think it is time for a proper law to be brought in to address specifically this issue.
Catherine.
Two of my colleagues proposed in the last parliament exactly that, a bill and introduced as a private member's bill to actually have laws to prohibit revenge porn. The difficulty for many young women and their parents, obviously, when they've discovered this material's been put up on sites, actually trying to get it taken down really quickly is very, very difficult. Already it's been shared, hundreds to, if not thousands of times by the time you're even made aware of it in the first place. I think there is a question about why is this actually happening and why do people think this is okay to do? Would you do it for your mother or your sister? No, of course not. Why are you doing it for your school colleagues? I do think that women need some protection here, and this again, I guess, goes to the issue around free speech. How
about the personal responsibility aspect of it? That young women are allowing themselves to be photographed in the first place.
This is outrageous, frankly. I think that statement, it goes exactly back to what Erin said, when we had court cases where, women were being subjected to, well, did you ask for it and what were you wearing? And, we're well beyond that. And, frankly, women have had enough of that sort of language around these sorts of issues. And I don't think that's a fair comment at all.
OK, let's go to another question on the same subject before we bring in the other panellists. Sarah Carter has a question for us.
Yes, to Senator Fifield. Last year, the New Zealand government passed the Harmful Digital Communications Act, making it an offence to send messages and post material online that deliberately causes serious emotional distress. Will the government of Australia afford Australian women the same protection by introducing similar legislation?
Mitch Fifield.
Well, we already have done something similar in Australia. Credit to Paul Fletcher and Malcolm Turnbull when we were in opposition, who drafted legislation to establish an e-safety commissioner. And the role of the e-safety commissioner that we have is several-fold. Firstly, its objective is to educate young people and women as to the dangers that there are online and action that they can take. It also is a cop on the beat when it comes to cyberbullying, and they've investigated about 11,000 cases of cyberbullying. The e-safety commissioner has the power to direct a social media organisation to take down offensive material, and if they don't, there are penalties of up to $17,000 per day for the social media organisation.
What about the perpetrators? Because the New Zealand legislation imposes hefty fines on people who post harmful digital communication, defined as cyberbullying, racist, sexist or religiously intolerant comments.
Well, at the moment, at a Commonwealth level, we have the criminal code, which is able to be used if someone is using a carriage service, a mobile phone, the internet to harass or intimidate or threaten someone. And there have been successful actions under that. You might recall there was what was known as the Jedi Council, serving and former ADF personnel. Someone was convicted under that and sentenced to 15 months in prison. So we do have that capacity at the Commonwealth level. We're a little bit different to New Zealand because we're not a unitary system of government. So at the state level, you have anti-stalking legislation and anti-defamation laws. So we have taken some serious steps, and I should also point out that the Children's e-safety commissioner plays a very important role in terms of material online which depicts child abuse.
So very briefly, this cyber cop on the beat you're talking about, are they investigating the cases of the women and girls who had material of their lewd material posted online by young men? Is that being investigated now seriously?
Well, absolutely. In fact, it's because of the actions of the e-safety commissioner and the Australian Federal Police that material was taken down. If that material had been hosted in Australia, it would have been a more straightforward exercise to have that material removed. It was hosted overseas. We don't have direct control of what happens overseas, so where that's the case, the Safety Commissioner and the AFP work with Interpol and partner agencies overseas to try and take this material down. But often the people who post this material are actively trying to hide who they are. So there's a lot of effort that's put in to identify who these people are so that it can be taken down as quickly as possible.
Let's hear from Brendan O'Neill and free speech advocates, libertarians in New Zealand got very hot under the collar over this legislation. What's your view?
You absolutely should not introduce anything like the Harmful Digital Communications Act in Australia, because that act is an outrage against freedom of speech, because not only does it forbid the use of revenge porn, which we can all agree is disgusting, but it also clamps down on commentary that is grossly offensive, that is indecent. So we're going back to the kind of very conservative, starched, blue-rinsed approach to indecent commentary. It clamps down on criticism of people according to their religion, according to their gender, according to their sexual orientation. So through the back door, it reintroduces a kind of blasphemy law online. There are numerous ways in which that legislation restricts legitimate speech, as well as clamping down on, for example, the sharing of images of underage girls, which we can all agree is a criminal offence. I think there is a cultural problem.
So just to confirm, you don't in any way say that young men have some freedom to do that, to post these images online?
Of course, no. Okay. A 15-year-old boy does not have the freedom to share the image of a 14-year-old girl online. But I think there is a genuine cultural problem with young people and pornography, the way they engage with it, the way in which they use it more than my generation did, the way in which they often define themselves through it. But I think laws like this are very evasive of the actual underlying problems here. And they use the sledgehammer of state censorship to try and crush something that actually needs a lot of consideration and a lot of deep thought and analysis. I think what we really need to get to grips with is the cultural phenomenon of young people using pornography in a very profound way, rather than introducing new forms of censorship which will really criminalise not only the sharing of underage images, but also the expression of certain opinions.
OK, let's hear from Corinne.
Just to clarify, the New Zealand law actually requires intention. So it's not going to criminalise people just having an opinion on issues of race or religion or what have you. There has to actually be an intention to cause harm. And that's a pretty high threshold to meet.
And who judges that?
Who judges? A judge.
The judge, right, OK. So are you happy? When did people become so cavalier about freedom of speech? Are you guys genuinely happy with the judge deciding what speech is legitimate and what speech is illegitimate?
No, they're deciding on intention.
Are you really?
It's intention.
Yeah, exactly. But when
and
it comes to...
they do that every day in the criminal system. They're well equipped to do it.
Right, but we're not talking about criminal acts. We're talking about the expression of ideas.
Hang on a second.
We're talking about the intention to cause harm.
Right, so you are happy with the blurring of the line between
wait a minute. We've got to actually hear both sides. So, Corinne.
I think I've made my point. I don't think Brendan gets it. I don't think there's anything else to say.
Let's just quickly go to Catherine. You've been listening to this. I mean, do you think there should be something like the New Zealand law here?
I must admit, I'm not aware of the details of the New Zealand laws, so I don't want to sort of shoot from the hip, but it certainly sounds as though, particularly in the area of revenge porn or where people are really struggling to actually get some sort of action taken, that we might need to have a look at going a bit further than we have currently. I hope the government does hear some of the views, particularly of women, around this issue. And you know, we've had a private members bill. I'm sure the two members who introduced it last time will be keen to introduce it again, and we hope the government supports it.
OK, let's shift focus. The next question is a video. It's from Tracy Donoghue in Port Vila, Vanuatu.
I was a teacher at the Nauru Regional Processing Centre until November last year. Incident reports that I wrote recounting events that I witnessed are amongst the leaked Nauru files. I witnessed death threats made to my students by local guards. I witnessed a very large guard lift and throw a student with force into the ground and a metal rail. I witnessed the daily verbal abuse and taunts that my students endured. I witnessed the appalling treatment of rape victims, and I witnessed countless injuries sustained by refugees and asylum seekers from assaults in the community. The government has again attempted to absolve itself of responsibility by claiming that the well-being and safety of those on Nauru is a matter for the government of Nauru. What do you think is the responsibility that the Australian government has for the refugees and asylum seekers on Nauru?
Mitch Fifield, we'll start with you.
Well, Nauru is a sovereign state. We have to recognise that the laws of that country operate and we have to abide by them. But the laws of that country are harsh as Australia's are when there are cases of abuse, when there are cases of assault. And it's important that mandatory reporting of incidents, as our questioner indicated, she had completed incident reports. They've got to be done and they've got to be fully investigated. And Peter Dutton, when there was the public release of some of these incident reports, made clear that his department was going to identify those that had already been addressed and assessed, those that had not, and also he made clear that there are some incident reports which are without foundation.
So just to confirm, are you saying that it is not the Australian government's responsibility to do anything about it, but it is the responsibility to investigate these incidents?
Well, it's a shared responsibility.
So it is a shared responsibility. So we have some responsibility for what happens on Nauru, is that right?
Oh, well, there wouldn't be incident reports. There wouldn't be incident reports filed if they weren't for the purpose of being investigated.
Now, the Immigration Minister you just mentioned, Peter Dutton, has accused The Guardian and the ABC of trivialising very serious issues. You're the Minister in charge of the ABC. Do you think that's true?
Well, I don't provide a running commentary on all of my colleagues and
I'm
the
asking
views
for your opinion
and the views,
on the ABC's reporting of these issues.
Yeah, let me finish. And the views that they put forward about any media organisation. I mean, let me make it clear, and this will please Michelle Guthrie, I'm sure. I'm not the ABC's editor-in-chief. My job is to fund the ABC, to appoint the board members, and on occasion to represent the community view to the ABC about the work that they do. Now, the ABC has legislated independence, and what that means is that if I say something or Peter Dutton says something, that doesn't impinge upon the independence of the ABC. But I should have the right, and Peter Dutton should have the right, and every member of Parliament should have the right to offer a view as to what they think of the ABC coverage on particular issues.
I'll pass on to the panellists in a moment, but do you even acknowledge the possibility that it could be something systematically wrong with the offshore detention centre in which the sort of incidents mentioned there happen to young children?
Look, I don't think there is anything systematically wrong with the system of offshore detention, and I'm sure that that is a bipartisan view, because it's actually the Australian Labor Party, after systematically dismantling offshore detention when they came into office in 2013, who then, in the face of overwhelming evidence, reintroduced offshore processing, because they recognised that the best way to stop deaths at sea was to remove the product that the people smugglers sold, and that is, if you come by boat, you won't be settled in Australia.
All right, Catherine King.
Yeah, let me respond to that. For a start, you have been in government for the past 3 years. The Australian government has a responsibility to make sure that people are treated, that they are safe, that they are treated with dignity, and that they are treated humanely. We can have disagreements with a whole range of people in terms of the offshore processing overall, but it is our responsibility to make sure those people are safe. And if reports are, as we have had, that children are not safe, then they not only must be investigated, it must be dealt with. That is why we have said we will support a Senate inquiry and the terms of which we are very open to really trying to find out, is there a systemic problem in the way in which that centre is being managed? It is also incumbent upon the government to get on with the business of resettling these people. They have been offered no hope for the last 3 years. It's been set and forget for a while. You've got on with the job of starting to resettle finally, but you need to actually start to do something. I think Peter Dutton's response to this shows that he's not learning the lesson. He's just digging in, and that's not what we need. This issue has to actually get resolved. There should be an independent commissioner for children to actually report to the Parliament and report publicly about the safety of children in particular in those detention centres. If you're going to have offshore processing, and yes, Labor agrees with offshore processing, as difficult as that is, we agree with that, but we don't agree with people being harmed in this way. It is not okay.
Was it the Labor Party's plan to leave these people in offshore processing centres for a short period of time and then resettle them in Australia?
It was not our plan to resettle them in Australia, but it was our plan to have them resettled. Absolutely, and that is, and the fact that they were not and have not been over the course of the past 3 years, I think it is incumbent for the government to get on with the job of finding credible third-party countries to resettle people, but also to make sure that people are safe, treated humanely and treated with dignity while they're in detention.
I want to hear from the rest of the panel, but just on this one question of the Senate inquiry, will you support the Senate inquiry into the sort of things that are being reported now about what's been going on in detention centres?
Well, the view of the government doesn't necessarily determine whether a Senate inquiry occurs or not.
But your votes are important. I mean, but look, if your votes and Labor's votes together in the Senate prevailed, there would be one. So I'm just asking, do you support one?
Well, it's not my call. I'm not the Minister for Immigration. But what
would you like to see one?
I'm not the Minister for Immigration. What Peter Dutton has made clear is that those 2,000 odd incidents which were cited will be investigated. And it's got to be acknowledged that not all of those incidents are of equal significance in terms of what is claimed. He's made clear that they will be examined. No one in government, no one in the Parliament has any tolerance for people being treated badly.
Well, they are being treated badly, so then what are we going to do about it? That's the issue.
No one has any tolerance for that. But the reason...
Did you know that this sort of thing was happening?
Well, I know that there has been reports. I know that Peter Dutton has said that they will be investigated. But the reason we're in this situation is that...
You're going to go Labor. Yeah,
the reason is because it's a fact. It's a fact. There were basically no people in detention when we left office in 2007.
I think we've heard...
But the facts...
Sorry, Minister, we have heard this argument. We have heard this argument. I just want to hear from the other panellists. We'll come back to you. Erin.
As a parent of an almost 3-year-old child, I think the idea that we've got children in any form of detention anywhere is awful, and I think that's just coming from a very human perspective. With regards to offshore processing, though, and then settlement offshore in a third party country, I think we're missing an enormous economic opportunity here. So research tells us that migrants are some of the most entrepreneurial people that we have in the country, and in fact refugees are more likely, of immigrants, they're the most likely to start a business. And as we move into the ideas boom and this knowledge-based economy, don't we need more of those people here in our country? We've got an ageing population. We need to replace the labour market.
Mitch Fifield, you can answer that briefly. Do we need more of those people in this country? And is it time to think about bringing some of those people here?
Look, Australia is a very generous nation when it comes to humanitarian settlement, something of the order of 13,000 per year. We're a government that is in favour of immigration, absolutely.
No, but I mean, yes, but very specifically, Erin was talking about the people on Manus and Nauru.
None of those people will come to Australia. If the people in that situation came to Australia, we would be saying to the people smugglers, get back into business. You have a product to sell again. And I know Catherine doesn't like being reminded that under Labor, 50,000 people came by boat. More than 1,200 people died at sea. We don't want to see...
Tony Abbott now regretting that he didn't agree with the Malaysia solution. Last
point, Tony. We've got all of the kids out of detention, credit to Peter Dutton, and we've closed 17 detention centres. The way to make sure we don't have these issues is to stop the boats for good.
Okay, Corinne.
There are 1,313 men, women and children in offshore detention as we speak. One of those people is an interpreter who interpreted for Australians in Afghanistan. And because of that, he watched his children get killed by the Taliban. And instead of thanking him and protecting him, we have locked him up on Manus for 3 years so far. If you want to have a real discussion about freedom of speech in this country, let's talk about the Australian Border Force Act. Tracy, what she just did then, by telling us what she saw in that detention centre, exposes her to 2 years in jail under the Australian Border Force Act. Section 42D makes it illegal for any kind of worker or employee who is working in those detention centres to make public what's happening. That includes doctors and psychiatrists who have a professional obligation to report to their peak bodies when someone has been abused either physically or psychiatrically. Now, they cannot do that and not fall foul of the Australian Border Force Act. It is true, Mitch, and you know it's true. They're not covered by the Whistleblowers Act. Mitch, read the legislation. The peak bodies that represent the professional organisations are not covered by the Whistleblowers Act, and they are certainly not covered under Section 42D of the Australian Border Force Act. And that is why Doctors for Refugees are forced into a position where they're having to take the government to the High Court to try and get this ridiculous law overturned. And the government is hoodwinking you. They do not want you to know what is happening in these centres, because if you did, if you genuinely knew what was happening to these people, no one in Australia would allow it to continue to happen. Every one of those 1,313 people would be brought to this country immediately if we really knew what was happening to them.
Okay, Brendan O'Neill. Thank you. Let's hear from Brendan O'Neill.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Corinne, but you can't spend 20 minutes defending censorship and then stand up for freedom of speech. That's not how it works. I am really... You now see how it works. As soon as you give an inch...
I have no idea what goes on in your brain. It's like the two hemispheres don't talk to each other.
As soon as you give an inch on freedom of speech, it will be taken away from you. Now you know how it works.
Can you answer the question?
I am against these offshore processing centres. I think what they create is a kind of purgatory, a limbo where immigrants, aspiring migrants, are stuck between a place they don't want to be and a place they do want to be. But you know what really worries me about this is the way in which both sides of this discussion demean these migrants. Because on one hand side you have the government and officials who criminalise them and detain them for the supposed crime of wanting to live and work in Australia. What a crime that is. But then on the other side, you have the leftists and the pro-refugee campaigners who infantilise them. And that's why you always hear discussion about migrant children. They're obsessed with migrant children because they see migrants themselves as children.
Can I just make the point? I'm going to interrupt you there, because if you listen to the question, Tracy was a teacher teaching children.
I agree.
We're talking about what she witnessed.
Yes. But I'm going
on Nauru.
I know.
You can, but I'd just like you to stick to the facts.
Okay, all right, but I'm looking more broadly at some of the media discussion, which also focuses a huge amount on children. And I think what you have is when you criminalise migrants and infantilise them, you do the same thing. You demean their moral autonomy. These are people who have shown great tenacity, great gumption, great spirit in travelling such a long distance to come to this country. And I don't think they benefit either from being criminalised by the government or from being infantilised by campaigners.
Okay,
what we need to do is respect their autonomy and allow them to come and live and work in this country.
All right. Now, Tracy, who sent that question in, has been watching the program tonight in Vanuatu, listening to our panellists on Facebook. She's just texted us this response. There are genuine, viable alternatives to regional processing, a cooperative regional approach. Nauru was only ever meant to be a temporary solution, hence plastic tents. It was never envisaged people would be living in those conditions for 3 years. Mitch Fifield.
Well, the Minister has made it abundantly clear that he is working hard on looking for countries where these people can be settled. It's not a straightforward...
Not New Zealand, which is offering to take 150 or more?
Look, it's not a straightforward thing to do. Even Catherine would have to acknowledge that the previous government didn't find it a straightforward thing to do. But I know it's not popular to say, but the best way to make sure that we don't get in this situation again is to ensure that those people who are in those facilities don't come to Australia, because if they did, we'd be back in this situation again, because the people smuggling trade would start again.
Well, we have to move on, but Corinne wants to respond.
Really quickly, child abuse is no excuse for not having the imagination to come up with a better policy. There are 1,800 immigration experts, including former members of the Immigration Department, who have recently put out a report and are begging to sit down with the government and talk about options around safe passage and an orderly process in order to determine people's claims. And my question to you, Mitch, and to the ALP as well, is why will you not sit down with these 1,800 people who have options to give you? Why will you not sit down and listen to them? And please don't tell me that Peter Dutton's got it under control.
Mitch, do you want to briefly respond to that, or just use facial expressions?
Corinne's good at answering her own questions, but look, Peter Dutton is happy to talk to... Peter Dutton is happy to talk to a wide range of people.
Well, let's get the summit happening then. These people are begging for a summit.
Well, talk to Peter Dutton. I'm not.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying.
You're in a probably better position to talk to Peter Dutton if it happens.
I'm sure he's watching, but then again, maybe he's not.
Let's move along. The next question comes from Henry Verhoeven.
In a recent newspaper article, the former Premier Jeff Kennett stated that, quote, the ABC's bias that was offensive and acceptable, unquote, in respect of its Four Corners report on juvenile detention in the Northern Territory. His lengthy article indicated that, amongst other things, the mattress incident happened in 2010 during the term of the ALP government, and that the old Dondale Juvenile Detention Centre was closed in 2014. Mr Kennett also asked, quote, had the ABC reported the situation accurately, would we be having a Royal Commission? Unquote. Is he right?
Mitch Fifield.
Thanks, Tony. It's a good night to be the Minister for Communications. Look, Tony, what we saw on the Four Corners report was deeply disturbing. It disturbed the Prime Minister enough that overnight he decided that a Royal Commission was needed. It disturbed the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory enough that he decided that a Royal Commission was needed. In terms of the report itself and what was a good representation, what was true, what was not. Ultimately, we'll find that out through the course of the Royal Commission because the Royal Commission is short, it's sharp, it's focused on juvenile detention in the Northern Territory, it's focused on child protection in the Northern Territory, so the facts will out. That's the purpose of the Royal Commission, but we were all concerned by it, including the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory on the night itself.
On the night itself, and that's the key thing. Jeff Kennett's a Liberal Party elder statesman. Adam Giles is a leader in the LNP. Do you take their claims of bias seriously, or is this just posturing ahead of an election in the Northern Territory?
Well, I assume that the staff at Four Corners do their work diligently and that they put a program to air when they were convinced that they were able to back up what they were putting there. They thought it was in the public interest, and I think the community at large, the Prime Minister, the Opposition Leader and the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory would agree that it was in the public interest.
Okay, Catherine King.
I think what we've seen from Four Corners over the course of the last few weeks has been the ABC at its absolute best, frankly. I think that having the capacity, investigate stories to really put facts out there in the public interest is really where we expect and want the ABC to be there. And I think it's been a really important debate to have, and it's been good to see the government actually take some action on that issue. I think there's going to be a lot more that will come out through the Royal Commission process that we need to hear about juvenile detention, not just only in the Northern Territory, I suspect.
Erin.
Yeah, I would agree that, as I said earlier, I don't think any children should be in detention. And I think what Malcolm Turnbull's done is demonstrate strong leadership by calling this Royal Commission, and it will be interesting to see what comes out of it.
Corinne?
I think it was interesting that Jeff Kennett's comments and Adam Giles' later comments after he sort of backed down from his strong stance at the start, saying how appalling it was, were in the context of an election campaign. So they were trying to win an election, and they thought they could win the election by criticising the ABC. You have a right, every Australian has a right under the Constitution to be fully informed before you go to the ballot box. And that was what the ABC was doing, was ensuring that people were fully informed before they went to the ballot box. That is your democratic right to know what's going on. And for both Adam Giles and Jeff Kennett to criticise the ABC for that is gobsmacking.
Brendan, have you followed this one?
I have, yeah. I think there is too much anti-ABC sentiment around, particularly among right-wing circles of society. The ABC becomes this kind of punch bag where they let off all their steam, especially you, Tony. You're the kind of their favourite punch bag.
He's got broad shoulders.
But I think he has got very broad shoulders. But I think, having said that, I do think the Royal Commission is somewhat of a displacement activity from some of the bigger unresolved issues in relation to those parts of Australia. And I think it was a knee-jerk decision, I think, on the part of the Turnbull government. Rather, let's just kind of push this aside and resolve this kind of media expose by instantly declaring a Royal Commission, rather than having a serious discussion about the living conditions lots of people in Australia, some people in Australia, find themselves in. So I'm not a fan of the Royal Commission, but I'm also not really in favour of all the attacks on the ABC.
OK, let's move on. The next question is a video. It's from Wayne Hawkins in Ultimo, New South Wales.
Wayne and Guide Dog Bo sit in lounge room in front of television.
My question is for Minister Fifield. Minister, my name is Wayne and I'm blind. I very much enjoyed television while we had the government-funded audio description trials running. But now that those trials have ended, I'm no longer able to enjoy television with my partner. We keep hearing that Australia is to be a nation of innovators, yet Australia is the only English-speaking country in the OECD with no audio-described television for the hundreds of thousands of Australians who are blind or vision impaired. The broadcast industry claims that it's too expensive to provide audio description on television. Yet in the May budget, you gave the industry a 25% rebate on their license fees. That amounts to about a $50 million a year saving for the industry. Wouldn't it have been in the national interest if you had required the industry to use some of those savings to provide audio description on television for Australians who are blind or vision impaired?
Mitch Fifield.
Thanks, Tony. Well, thanks, Wayne, for the question. I know Wayne from my previous incarnation is the Minister for Disabilities, and he makes a good point. There was a trial of audio description on the ABC that concluded in about the middle of this year, and we've got an interim report on that exercise. We'll have a final report in the near future, and as a former Minister for Disabilities, I'm very keen to look to see what we can do in terms of audio description. It's important that people, if they're blind or vision impaired, have access to media. So Wayne, thank you for the prompt.
So just to confirm this, you want it to happen, you'll be pushing for it with the Razor Gang, presumably.
Well, look, it's something which I know the people during the trial thoroughly enjoyed, having that access that they hadn't previously had. We've got to look at the final report that comes through. There'll be some technical issues, I know. I can't make any promises here tonight, but I'm not unsympathetic to where Wayne's coming from.
OK, that is a good start. We'll move on to what will be our final question. It's from Caitlin Clark.
This week, Malcolm Turnbull has postponed the same-sex marriage plebiscite to early next year. We already know that the majority of Australians support marriage equality. Do you think a costly plebiscite is needed when our elected representatives could just represent us?
Let's start with Erin.
I agree with the plebiscite because I think that I don't think our parliamentarians have been able to come up with with an agreement on this. So I think that we need to be able to exercise our democratic right and go out there and place that vote. Just because we all, look, I don't know if there's some research on whether or not Australia does overwhelmingly support same-sex marriage. I do. But I think that this is an opportunity for us to go out there and really say this is what we agree with as a nation, and this is the type of society that we want to live in.
Erin, the former High Court Judge Michael Kirby said this morning the plebiscite should not go ahead. It'll be terribly divisive. It will likely fail. He says it'd be better to wait for a government that's prepared to deal with it in Parliament. What do you say to that?
I think that's an interesting comment. I don't think that it will be that divisive. If, as you say, that so many people do support same-sex marriage, then it's not going to be divisive. But I think that we need to, as a society in Australia, we need to face these hard questions and come up with an answer. And I think this is the right way to go about doing that.
Corinne.
It's not binding. It's expensive. And is an excuse for a very, very small minority of Australians to engage in cruel and hurtful behaviour under the guise of calling it debate. This is going to happen in Australia at some point. It's already happened in Ireland. It's already happened in the United States. It will happen in Australia. All people remember are the first people through the door and the last people through the door. And Corey Bernardi and his mates are going to be remembered as the last people through the door.
Keep it brief.
I think the anti-plebiscite sentiment really speaks to a curiously elitist component to the gay marriage campaign, where they seem to have this real fear of the people. And actually, I would say that, they continually accuse people who criticise gay marriage of being bigoted. But actually, the bigotry often comes from pro-gay marriage campaigners who presume that there are swathes of ignorant, stupid, redneck people out there just waiting to bash homosexuals. So I would be very interested in having this debate out, having it in public, amongst the demos, rather than turning gay marriage into this rather elitist campaign that is constantly about avoiding public engagement.
So the former High Court Judge Michael Kirby says that equal rights should exist outside of a plebiscite vote. In other words, they exist anyway. It's just up to the Parliament to legislate what already exists.
Well,
that's his argument, a former High Court judge.
Yeah, but I don't have much faith in judges. But I would say, I would simply say that this is different to other equal rights in the sense that an institution is being called into question and redefined. Now, you may agree with that or disagree with that, but we have to allow the public to engage in that discussion.
Catherine King.
Look, the parliamentarians have been elected to decide these issues. They've decided that, them in the past. We should just get on with it and have a vote in the Parliament about it. I think the plebiscite is costly. I think it will be divisive. There's no doubt about that at all. And I think, frankly, we've now got it delayed until next year. Turnbull has promised that it's going to be this year, and now it's not. I think it's going to get pushed out even further than earlier next year. We should just get on with it, frankly. The Parliament's been elected to be there.
Are you saying it should not go ahead as a matter of principle?
I think, we don't support, Labor doesn't support the plebiscite. We don't, we think, frankly, I'm a supporter of same-sex marriage and will vote yes for it. I think at the end of the day, regardless of the outcome of a plebiscite, there is still going to have to be a vote in Parliament.
You'll vote yes to have a plebiscite, will you?
No, we won't. Well, we haven't actually had a discussion internally about that, but our view, frankly, is that we don't support the plebiscite. It should be a vote of the Parliament because it will be a vote of the Parliament at the end of the day.
So Labor might
anyway.
be in a position in the Senate to vote against it.
We
may
may
have enough numbers to stop it.
We may be.
Is that the intention?
We haven't had a discussion about that yet, but we may well be.
What would your advice be to your colleagues?
I'll take the counsel of my colleagues as we go in, but certainly I don't support the plebiscite and I'd be speaking in that way.
Mitch Fifield.
Well, we took a clear policy to the election that we would have a plebiscite, that we would have a national vote to determine marriage law in this nation. We've had the policy for the best part of a year. It wouldn't surprise me at all if the Australian Labor Party sought to stop us implementing an election commitment. I think they should reconsider.
You've already broken it. You've already broken it anyway. It was going to be at the end of this year. No, it's not going to happen.
Would you agree that if Labor votes against it in the Senate, it probably won't happen?
Well, look, as manager of government business in the Senate, I am by nature a legislative optimist. You've got to be. Look, the Labor Party should support it. I'd urge the crossbench to support the legislation. But as I talk to Australians, I think they've embraced the idea of having a vote, of having the opportunity to have their say in this area. I think that's a good thing. But I've got to say, in response to Catherine's question, we haven't backed away from our commitment in any way, shape, or form. We always said that we would have the plebiscite. We always said that we would have the plebiscite as soon as practicable, and that remains the case.
I'm afraid that's where we'll have to leave it because we are out of time. Please thank our panel, Catherine King, Brendan O'Neill, Corinne Grant, Mitch Fifield and Erin Watson-Lynn. OK, thank you very much to our very lively, terrific audience. Now, next week Q&A will focus on inequality. A new think tank report says inequality is threatening economic growth. Other economists claim it's the cost of welfare that's holding us back. This year's Boyer lectures argue that inequality is also driving poor health. So is there a way around inequality and the welfare trap? Joining our panel next week, a Boyer lecturer and president of the World Medical Association, Michael Marmot. Sydney University Professor of Economics, Deborah Cobb-Clark. The chair of the Prime Minister's Indigenous Advisory Council, Warren Mundine. Notre Dame University's Christine Bennett, who led Kevin Rudd's Hospital Reform Commission. And the head of the Australian Council of Social Services, Cassandra Goldie. So until next week, good night.